Hi, this is T. Brigalosi, also known as Editorial Dude, and today I am going to try something new with the videos. So instead of me ramming my opinions down your throat, which is the way I usually do these videos, I wanted to talk today about specific genres that I don't know a lot about. So, there are only so many hours in a day and only so many days in a year. And between working and sleeping, none of us have enough time to read everything we want to read. And so I think that all of us have ideas about what we'd like to read more of, or at least try, but we never really get around to doing that because we are so enmeshed in our favorite genres or recommendations from friends about books that they think that we'll like and so forth. And so I shouldn't speak for you, I can only speak for myself. There are genres out there that I just don't have much or any experience with. And I feel as though in 2018 and beyond, I want to dip my toes into those waters more, just to see what I'm missing. A lot of them are very, very popular, and especially among younger people. And I want to stay in touch with what the reading public reads, and that's hard to do. It's hard to sort of understand every cross-section of society. So what I'm hoping will result from this video is a lot of you typing comments here, giving me suggestions for books to read or books that I should try that you think are particularly good representations of their particular genre. What I would ask in terms of your recommendations is to think of what you would recommend to a newbie, to someone who really doesn't know much about that genre, as representing the best of what can be done in that genre. Because I feel, if you don't want to start out with something too advanced, right? You can't take geometry before you take algebra. You can't do multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. So I'd like to start out slow and develop my base of foundational knowledge in these genres before I go on to anything more, more advanced. And so, there are lists all over the net of books in these genres that one should or must read, but I thought I would just go out to all of you directly and ask your opinions. So herewith my list of genres that I don't know much or anything about and would like to learn more about. So number one is manga. So when I go to bookstores, particularly large bookstores, I'm amazed by the amount of titles in this category. And they take up shelves and shelves. It seems like acres. And there are so many of them that I don't know where to begin. I've read some graphic novels in my time, not a lot. I read Ghost World by Daniel Clowes, and I read The Dark Knight. Those are the only two. I read both of them on airplanes and enjoyed them. I particularly liked Ghost World. I like its sort of postmodern take. And it's just so oddly, strangely, but wonderfully weird. It appealed to me. But I know that there's a whole bunch of manga out there that would really I should read because it would show me the best of what can be done in that genre. So if anybody has recommendations for really good manga work to start with, I would love to hear them. You know, I'm interested in this partially because a lot of what I'm doing these days in terms of my own editorial work has to do with, or at least talks about, the relationships between words and images, our multimedia society, visual learning styles. Many people learn visually, through pictures first. And so I think we all know or suspect that pictures can have great explanatory value. Dare I quote the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Picture's not a substitute for words, but using the two of them together, I think, can be very powerful. And I suspect that anime, or manga, accomplishes that. So I want to learn more. So please help me out with that. Okay, number 2 is a genre that I have read a little bit of, not much. And the funny thing for me is that anytime I've read one of these books, I've almost always enjoyed them. I've read several as part of a book club that I belonged to for about 10 years. There was one guy in the club who, whenever it was his turn to choose the book, he almost always picked science fiction. And I always read it, opened it with the sense of obligation, okay, I have to read this book to be a good member of the book club. But I almost always ended up enjoying them quite a bit. But I never took that step on my own. I never broke out of my own box to explore more of the science fiction world. I will say that I've read 2 maybe offshoots of science fiction. I don't know if they would really be classified under science fiction or if they are their own genres. One of them is dystopian fiction. And I find that I've been very drawn to that in the last few years. Maybe because our society has become so dystopian, or maybe it was always dystopian and we're just more aware of it now. Dystopian books aren't typically feel-good reads. There's this sense of a supreme authority pressing down on all of the characters and their lives. And, that's not particularly a good feeling. So my sense of those books is that what often makes them work are good, moral characters who are doing the best they can in a world that has just gone haywire. And, I can't read a steady diet of dystopian, but I do really like it. So I'd like to read some more. I have some visual aids. My favorite dystopian book, I would say, of the last 5 years is this one right here. It is William Gibson's book, The Peripheral. And I discovered this book at an independent bookshop on Cape Cod in the town of Chatham. It was there as a staff recommendation. And it's challenging in that it's a bit like A Clockwork Orange. There's a whole new language you have to learn. You have to learn and understand because it's part of the world of The Peripheral. And William Gibson needs no introduction, although I had not read anything by him before this. It's so brilliantly imagined, and the language was so challenging to learn. And I think when you're learning a language, as in The Peripheral, that you'll only use once for the reading of that book, the temptation is probably to think, is this worth my time? Why am I learning a language that will never be used again? But I found it so worthwhile in The Peripheral. I just loved the book, and there's particularly one character in there, a female character, who is fabulous. She's she's almost in my pantheon of great characters of all time. So I recommend it highly if you can handle a challenge. It's like a another. Someday I'd like to read a book written in Esperanto. I'm fascinated by Esperanto. I know a tiny bit about it and would like to learn it, but really, who has the time? That's the thing. It would require a time commitment. And until I retire, I don't think Esperanto will be entering my daily vocabulary. But once I do learn it, I would like to read a novel written in it. Another dystopian book that I really enjoyed is this one, The Water Knife by Paolo Bacigalupi, fellow Italian or Italian-American. And that one is very, very timely because it's all about water, hence the title, The Water Knife. And the ways water is diverted from its natural sources to other communities, and how in a world that may end up drought-ridden, as a lot of the world is. In the United States, we sort of take water for granted, but they don't take water for granted in the Middle East and other places because it's not in such copious supply. And I really liked the Water Knife. I found it quite interesting, and I recommend it as a good dystopian book. The other subgenre of science fiction that I have read and liked a lot, although I haven't read a lot of books, is steampunk. And one of the book that introduced me to steampunk is this one right here, George Mann's book, The Affinity Bridge. I almost said a Calvin and Hobbes mystery. It's a Newbery and Hobbes mystery. And steampunk was a world completely unknown to me. I had no idea what it was about. For those of you who don't know much about steampunk, I'm not one to talk with authority on the elements of steampunk. But it's the world is sort of a dark, robotic, quasi-Victorian world with dirigibles flying around and weird creatures like revenants preying on people. It's a sort of a heady mix of a bunch of different elements that I haven't fully wrapped my head around. And I know that they have steampunk conventions. I'd love to go to one of these days. If you see pictures of the way people dress at these steampunk conventions, they're so cool. And you can tell they put so much thought into looking so awesome. So I just really like steampunk. So if anybody has recommendations for other good steampunk books, I would love to hear them. But really, science fiction in general. I think the first science fiction books I ever read were Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. And I liked those books a lot. They play with time, the space-time continuum, and that always makes my head spin in a good way. When I watch episodes of, say, Star Trek that play with the timeline or the time continuum, those tend to be some of my favorite episodes because, I don't know, just the idea of time travel or simultaneous worlds happening side by side without us knowing about it. I just like the idea. A time travel book that I loved. Please read this book. It's important and amazing. Is Dexter Palmer's book, Version Control. And that's sort of a science fiction dystopian book. Its initiating incident is a death caused by a self-driving car. And we all hear about self-driving cars and self-driving trucks are coming our way. And there are many predictions as to whether that will be a good thing or a bad thing. And Dexter Palmer's Version Control is so much about, even though it takes place kind of in the future, it's about the way we live now and how technology has taken over our lives and what it's doing to us and our relationships and our methods of communication. And the book does not imply that it's doing good things for us as beings and as society. But I think that book is one of the best I've read in the last 10 years. So I recommend it. I should have pulled it off my shelf to show to you, but if I do it now, I'll put my back to you and wants to see my back. So again, number 2, science fiction. Please give me your recommendations of good science fiction to start with or continue with. Number 3 is something that I just haven't read. I don't know that I've ever read even one of these, and that is biography. And I don't know why I have never read a biography. They don't particularly appeal to me. I can't explain why, unless it's a person of extreme magnitude or importance. But even then, I don't know why. I can't explain. So if anybody could recommend a really good biography or two for me to start with, I'd like to see what they're all about and how a good biography is written. I'm not too interested in autobiography because I'm thinking about that old line in The Simpsons where Bart Simpson says about Krusty the Clown's biography, it was self-serving and filled with many glaring omissions. So I think probably autobiography is not the best way to learn the truth about a person. But I'd like to read a biography of either a famous person or a not-so-famous person who should be famous. One thing I request, please don't recommend Steve Jobs. He really irritates me. There are just some people who set your teeth on edge. He's always had that effect on me. The people at Apple get a hold of this, I may disappear and never be heard from again. A great man, a great visionary. And maybe it's not Steve Jobs that sets my teeth on edge. Maybe it's all of the Steve Jobs wannabes who give TED Talks and dress in black from head to toe and wear those glasses that Steve Jobs wore and have that hair that Steve Jobs had. So I'm not really that interested in Steve Jobs, but other people I'm sure I could be interested in. Number 4 is a genre. I've read a couple of books in this genre. I think I don't know if you consider Harry Potter in this genre or not, but the genre is young adult or YA. And again, when I go to the bookstore, I'm amazed at the amount of books there in the YA section. And what does my heart good is to see all of the young people, I'd say young adults, who are gobbling up those books. I also am impressed with the physical look of those books. They have terrific cover art and design, and it seems like a lot of money is being invested in young adult books these days, and the industry doesn't invest in things that don't make money. So I'm happy to see that young adult novels are making money for their publishers and their authors. And I would like to read a few of them, be in touch with what's going on in the YA world. I have a niece and a nephew, 15 and 12. I'm always trying to get them to read more. So I'm thinking maybe if I find some really great YA books through your recommendations, I can read them and then pass them on and suggest discussion or something just to get them more into reading, because neither one of them is really a reader. They're a tap on their cell phone 24 hours a day, but they're not readers. And so I'm hell-bent on doing whatever I can to change that. But I don't think it's going to be easy. I need your help to do that. And I also want to know what the young adult experience is these days. You get to a certain age, you have your friends, your routine, your job, you know what you like and you know what you don't like. But I just suspect, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, that what young adults are experiencing, the times that they're living through, were so different from what I experienced, in my age cohort, or what you may have experienced. I'd like to have more of a sense of what what their values are and where they struggle. I just think it would be good knowledge to have, so that when I see a bunch of teens or young adults behaving in a particular manner in a group, I understand why, that behavior. I think back to my young adult days, and I remember in those days everyone had a long plastic comb that they kept in the back pocket of their designer jeans, and all day long throughout school, everyone was whipping out their combs and combing their hair, and if you did it in class, you got yelled at or thrown out, or the worst possible outcome, you had your comb confiscated. You don't see that so much anymore, but you do see a lot of kids taking selfies and other things. So I'm belaboring the point, but if you've got young adult books that you'd like to recommend, please let me know about them. And so number 5 is a genre that I can say with almost certainty that I've never once read. And that is a full-on romance novel. So, full disclosure, when I was young, early teens, outside my bedroom door in the house that I grew up in, there were large bookcases. My mother kept all of her books on that shelf. Well, all of the books that were fit for public consumption. She had some adult books that were hidden from me, such as The Exorcist. She thought, I think quite rightly, that no kid could handle that book. I mean, wow. Just too intense and disturbing and upsetting. As I learned as a kid, when I dug it out of my mother's hiding place and read it and couldn't sleep for a month because I was so terrified. And she also read The Happy Hooker, and I just had no idea what that title meant, a hooker. I thought, oh, about a fisherman, The Old Man in the Sea, Part 2. Let's see what this is all about. And again, I read through it when she wasn't looking. I retrieved it from her hiding place. And that was eye-opening. But I digress. So on one of the lowest shelves in her bookcase, the books that I could reach when I was a kid were books by Victoria Holt, the Gothic suspense novelist. And I just picked one up one day and read it. And I look back now and I realize that they were romances, but what appealed to me about them was the suspense. The heroine, there was always someone out to kill the heroine. I mean, not just, no one was, at the end, the heroine and her man always walked out hand in hand into the sunset, but only after someone had tried to kill her. And that was the aspect of those books that I liked, that suspense. I guess you'd call it romantic suspense, which is probably a slightly different genre from true full-on romance. And again, I know nothing about this genre. Truthfully, I'm not that interested in it. It's not something I really want to read, but I would like to read one or two really good romances, because I know there are so many devoted romance readers. There was on the Connecticut-Massachusetts border on Interstate 84, there's a very quirky place set up on the hill that its sign says something like food and books. I had passed it many times, so finally a couple months ago I said, I'm going in there. I need to see what this place is all about. And it's kind of a cafe with table service, but they also sell books. And they had brown shopping bags full of romance. Like you could buy 50 romance novels in a brown paper bag for $10. And, you know, there are a lot of romance novels out there that don't really, they're not blips on my radar screen. I don't pay attention to them. But I'd like to know who are the best purveyors of romance novels now, and maybe read one or two just to see what they're all about. I've never edited one. I've never read one. You know, I don't have a list of clients banging down my door saying, Steve, would you please edit this romance manuscript? I would feel completely incompetent and out of my league. But I don't have to worry about turning anybody down because nobody asks me to do that. But I like to read the unexpected, and I like to keep expanding my horizons. So if you have any suggestions for great romance novels, not literature, not Gone with the Wind, that have meaning beyond being a romance novel. I'm talking about, I'd like to read a mass market, successful romance novel that's not a bitchy romance like Jackie Collins books, or that type. I like it to be full-on romance. Maybe I'll learn something. That would be good. So that's my wish list. Please type to your heart's content and let me know what books I'm missing out on and which I should add to my list. There's always a list of books to be purchased when I get some money, when I get a check. And I would like to get to them in 2018 and 2019 or whenever. And maybe I'll find a new writer whose work I have to read all of that I love so much. That would be a wonderful outcome. So as I mentioned in the last video, I want to close all of my videos by recommending a writer or a book, and by mentioning or guessing at the type of reader who would find this writer's books appealing, and the type of reader who probably would not be interested in those books. So today I would like to talk about one of the most, I think, cruelly neglected English mystery writers of the last century. And her name is Celia Fremlin. So she made quite a splash with this book, The Hours Before Dawn. This was her first novel, and it won the Edgar for the best mystery. And you'd call Celia Fremlin's books domestic suspense. Not a term we hear a lot these days, although I think it's been having a renaissance in certain quarters. But Celia Fremlin's characters are always women who feel slightly behind the times. They see things very clearly. Celia Fremlin was a brilliant observer of society and trends and everything within her purview. I mean, she was razor sharp and so funny. Her observations, beyond being brilliant, are hilarious. You laugh out loud. She is like a mixture of Jane Austen and Oscar Wilde, she was funny as hell. And things threaten her, and that the stories sort of ramp up slowly in terms of horror or threat to the heroine. I wouldn't say you read Celia Fremlin for the plots. The plots are okay. Some of them are better than others. But for her incisive wit, I don't think anybody writes a more witty, observant, razor sharp mystery. Two of my favorites are With No Crying, and this one is basically about a teenage girl who pretends to be pregnant for various reasons. And things sort of spin out of control as time progresses, and she should be getting larger around the middle, and she isn't. So she has to find ways to simulate that. It's very funny and sharp. My favorite of her books is this one. It's called Dangerous Thoughts. This book is so clever. It's about a woman whose husband is a cowardly journalist. Their marriage is troubled, and she knows he's a bit of a craven man and not really trustworthy. And yet he gets an assignment, I believe, in the Middle East, and he disappears for a few days. And so there's a huge hue and cry that he's been kidnapped and held for ransom by terrorists. And he makes it back to England and starts putting his story out there about how he escaped, through his own brilliance, and made it back to England. And the narrator, it's a first-person narrative. She suspects that this is not on the up and up because parts of his story don't add up, and she knows who he is. And her dilemma throughout the book is, does she expose her husband for the fraud that she thinks he is, or does she just let it go? Does she, as his wife, does she pretend not to see what she's seeing? And it has an unexpected ending. So if you like Jane Austen and Oscar Wilde, and you love a razor-sharp wit, I think Celia Fremlin is right for you. People who I think would not care for Celia Fremlin, and I have to thank my friend Fairley Patrick for sharing this insight. It wasn't something that had occurred to me, but I was telling her about how much I love Celia Fremlin, and we were discussing why she isn't read much these days, or at least not commented about. I mean, you don't find a lot of reviews of her books, and you don't really read many mentions of her, which is grossly unfair in the universal sense. And Fairley said, the problem is the heroines, that today's readers expect a strong heroine. They expect a woman who takes the bull by the horns and solves a problem, is independent and powerful and has some agency. And it's true that Celia Fremlin's characters, most of them, she changed a little bit in the later books, but they observe more than they act. And that's what gets them into trouble. They're so observant, and yet they're always questioning their own observations, because what they see is very different from what the world tells them they should be seeing. They're constantly in a state of questioning themselves. And so Fairley pointed out, today's readers don't want a heroine who's super conflicted or doesn't trust her own perceptions. They want a heroine that sees the path forward and takes it, kicks some ass and gets the job done. Whereas Celia's heroines kind of muddle along and let the world act on them. They don't often take charge of the situation, which is how they find themselves in trouble. Another really good book of hers that I like a lot is called The Troublemakers. And that has an interesting theme of the real damage that can be done by gossip, by neighborhood gossip. I mean, these books were published decades ago, so it was before gossip channels like TMZ and a million other internet-based rumor-mongering sites. If you want a strong J.D. Robb type heroine like Eve Dallas, I don't think Celia Fremlin's books will be for you. But if you want to be amazed on every page by the sheer quality of the writing and the sense of, I think we've all felt this way, am I alone in this perception? Why do I think this? Why do I perceive this? Whereas everybody else in the world sees this completely differently. You will enjoy Celia Fremlin. So please do check her out. And if you like her, recommend her to your friends, because she really deserves to be read much more than she is now. Okay, so there's my wish list. Thank you very much for listening. I'll look forward to getting your comments, and I hope everybody has a good evening.